Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today I have my January recap. So here's the deal. Normally I do a weekly wrap up and I do that on purpose because if I save my discussion of the books that I'm reading until the end of the month, I just have way too much to say about each book. That monthly video would be at least 2 hours long and ain't nobody got time for that. So I don't want to do a monthly wrap up where I go through all of the books that I read and also try to remember all the details about each one and the plots and, you know, how much I like them or not, whatever. However, I do want to kind of look back at the month because I do my TBRs a month at a time. So I want to look back and say, how well did I do, first of all, meeting my goals for the month? And secondly, what books did I particularly like? Was there something that stuck out to me among the books? What were some thoughts that I wrote down from the books, etc., that sort of thing. I just want to look back and glance over it and remember what I read for those reasons. So I do want to do some kind of monthly recap, but not like necessarily going through the whole list of books in a, you know, consecutive sort of way, or even in a ranking way, which I may do. So this year I'm going to kind of experiment a little bit with that. If the way I do it this particular month seems to work well for me, and if you guys like it well enough, I'll probably just do it this way every time, or I may just experiment with a couple of different ways of reviewing the previous month while accomplishing my primary objective, which is to see how I measured up against my goals for the month. In other words, how many books from my TBR did I read? And anything that stuck out to me about the books or in comparison of the books or whatever, things that I just want to mention about my reading life that month that maybe didn't make it into the weekly wrap-ups, and more general commentary. So here we go. First of all, I want to share, since I'm taking the time this year to be a little more intentional about my journaling with my reading, I want to share some of that with you because, you know, everything's better when you share it, right? So to start with, I'm going to go through my reading journal and look and see how I'm doing on the goals that I have, my overall goals, not necessarily specifically for January, but overall. And if I made any progress on any of them. And I am happy to report that I have indeed made progress. First of all, on this page, this is other authors that I want to try. And in other words, they're not necessarily Christian authors or classic authors, just, you know, general authors. And I did cross off one. So that was Hazel Gaynor, which I read The Last Christmas in Paris in January. And then of the classic authors that I want to read, I read a book by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I read The Hound of the Baskervilles. So I was able to color that in. And that is just so exciting. Like, there is just something about crossing off things off a list or checking off a box that's just like, can't beat that feeling, right? Am I right? And then on this page, there were some 2024 releases that I wanted to read, and I have read one so far, The Seamstress of Acadie by Laura France. And for my list of nonfiction reads, which I would love to fill this page this year, but that's not necessary. I just fit that many dots on the page. The first one I read was Full by Asheritah Choo Choo. And in this book, I'm tracking all my different challenges. So for the Read Your Shelf challenge, I started on The Hound of the Baskervilles, the Conan Doyle track, and I actually read The Hound of the Baskervilles. And I even purposely found a book with a dog on the cover. So then the Tea and Ink Society was my other challenge that I do every month. And I don't know if you watched the weekly wrap up where I told about my little error on this one. I am a terrible scribe, apparently. When I wrote the list in this journal of what each of the prompts were for this month, I totally wrote the wrong thing for January. It was supposed to be to reread a favorite classic. I did a classic you've never read before. I don't know how I got that so wrong. I have no idea. So I did totally the wrong thing, and I read book 1 of The Fairy Queen, which I read the edition that's titled Fierce Wars and Faithful Loves, and that was really good. And then for the What the Dickens Facebook book club that I'm in, we read A Girl in Winter by Philip Larkin. So that's the progress of the various goals that I have for the year. Plenty of other goals that I didn't do anything on, but that's okay. It's all about, you know, just being intentional with my choices this year and just generally making progress on those goals in my reading life. In my overall 2024 book tracker, I colored in 12 books. I think on Goodreads, it has me at 13. I don't know why. There's always a discrepancy between my reading journal and my Goodreads. I don't know. I think it might be because the first one I read, it was a trilogy, and I just put the last one, or the whole trilogy kind of works together as one novel. So I just put that in my reading journal, but technically I read the last 2 books of the trilogy in January. So I think that's probably where the discrepancy is, but we're going with 12 for this purposes of this tracker, which, by the way, is an astoundingly large number for me. I don't normally read 12 books in a month. And I was like, how did that even happen? I think it's because, one, January is a slower month in terms of like social engagements and that kind of thing. I can see February is already picking up in that regard. So there's not as much that I have to do, like, you know, be out and about doing in January. Plus we had a whole week where I went to work for 1.5 days because of snow and holidays and everything. So had a lot of time to read that week. And then we had some days where, you know, we were sick, and so, or the kids were sick or whatever. So didn't have all the usual obligations. So I just ended up having more time to read in January than I normally do. I don't think that's going to happen very often this year. So that was nice. I got 12 books in. Gave me a head start on my overall goals. So these are the pages where I kept track of the books that I read. And I put 3 pages for each month in this journal, and it turned out to be the perfect amount for this month, which was probably the most I'll read, 12 books. So that's good that I can fit them in there. What I want to do is, I think, kind of go through very quickly the books that I read in January in kind of like categories. So, and kind of like compare and contrast them with each other and mention them in that way. I don't want to say too much about the Price of Privilege trilogy that I finished up, because I did a whole long video about that one, and you can watch that video if you're curious about my thoughts about that one. Really good book, highly good series. I highly recommend. Really excellent writing and an excellent story and an excellent ideas and themes behind the story that's really just beautifully told. So really like that one, but I won't spend a lot of time talking about that one. I read 2 historical fiction books earlier in the month. One, and they both kind of had Christmassy vibes to them, although they weren't straight up Christmas stories really. The first one was The Last Christmas in Paris by Hazel Gaynor, and I gave that one 4.5 stars, which was most of my books in January were kind of stuck in that range of 4-ish stars. They kind of like all, I mean, which was just good. I mean, that was good reading. I only give 5 stars if it stands out for some reason to me, like it rises above the rest. But 4 is very good. I only had a couple of 3.5 stars, which is actually my typical rating for a book. Like, I like that book. It's good. You know, 3 stars, 3.5 stars. But I had a lot of 4 and 4.5 star reads. So that was good. Good reading month overall in a lot of ways. Anyway, Last Christmas in Paris versus Small Things Like These. Last Christmas in Paris was set during World War I and is epistolary. And then Small Things Like These is a little novella, somewhere between a short story and a novella, set in Ireland in the 1980s, right around Christmas time. And they're really apples and oranges. It's difficult to compare the 2 of them, because they're very different in their purpose and their plot and the characters and everything, the length, the size, all of it, the structure, all of it, very different. Both very impactful, but in different ways. Between the 2, even though I gave both of them 4.5 stars, between the 2, I don't know, it's hard. Small Things Like These was definitely a little more on the literary side. So in that sense, it was a little bit stronger of a book than Last Christmas in Paris. But story-wise, I really enjoyed the story and the characters more in Last Christmas in Paris. The other thing is that I talked in a recent video about how books are very often idea-driven or plot-driven, at least from my perspective. And I feel like Small Things Like These was idea-driven, and Last Christmas in Paris was more plot-driven and or character-driven. Not so much about ideas. Now I've got ambulances. My goodness. Anyway, so Small Things Like These, I would even say, crosses a border to being more propaganda-ish, because it's really talking about, it's highlighting a social problem that has more or less been resolved, at least in this particular instance, of the Magdalen laundries in Ireland. But the same sort of evil still persists. And so it's definitely, the whole point of that story is to highlight that aspect of Irish history and that particular problem of, unwed mothers, or, women who have children as single parents, and, what to do with that. And it's been handled in different ways in different times throughout history. And some cultures do nothing. Some cultures, it's not a big deal. Some cultures, it's par for the course. In modern times, it's not as much of an issue as it was when those Magdalen laundries were started. But anyways, it's definitely issue driven. That's the main idea behind the story, and that's what drives the story. So, however, I found it interesting because I didn't know anything about those Magdalen laundries, and it was beautifully told, but it did leave a lot of questions at the end. So it didn't answer all of the questions that it was asking, and it left the reader with questions about what's going to happen next. I mean, I think I have an idea, and I don't really like it, and it's not a good wrap up to the story, but at the same time, really realistic and true to human nature. So, and then I read 2 detective stories back to back, which was very interesting to compare and contrast an Agatha Christie book with a Sherlock Holmes book, and that was fun. I enjoyed that back to back contrast. I gave Death on the Nile 4.5 stars and Hound of the Baskervilles 4 stars. Honestly, they're both more or less equal in my mind. I guess the Agatha Christie one was maybe just a touch higher up there, more enjoyable as a story for me than Hound of the Baskervilles. And I find I like the Hercule Poirot character as a detective more than I like Sherlock Holmes as a detective. Sherlock Holmes is just, he has more of an edge to his personality than Hercule Poirot. He's not as likable. He's not written that way. He's not intended to be that way. At the same time, he is very humorous. So, there's a lot to enjoy there. So I definitely will be reading more of both. I didn't dislike either one, but it was interesting to compare. I'll just mention in passing, I forgot to mention in a weekly wrap up, I just read one of the snow days that I was home, this novella, A Snowbound Courtship. Looks like it's from a series of some kind. I can't see the little writing. Anyways, it was just a short, clean romance novella, and really cute. Enjoyed that one. Gave it 3 stars. I liked it. It was fun. Not going to reread again. It was fun for a snow day. And then I read 3 Christian fiction, historical fiction books. Veiled in Smoke, Hope Between the Pages. Veiled in Smoke was by Jocelyn Green. Hope Between the Pages by Pepper Basham. And The Seamstress of Acadie by Laura France. All 3 very different books. All 3 very good. All 3 I gave 4 stars. So, trying to decide between the 3 of them, if one of them edged out the others. If I ranked them, I would probably say the first one, The Seamstress of Acadie, second, Veiled in Smoke, third, Hope Between the Pages. But it's really close between The Seamstress of Acadie and Veiled in Smoke. And those both have a very similar feel to them. Both of the characters, in both of the stories, the characters lose everything. And there's a process of rebuilding there and a process of healing. In Veiled in Smoke, there's just layers upon layer upon layer upon layer of loss that they have to work through, and different issues that they're struggling with in the story, including mental illness and all of that. There is a lot going on. It's a really heavy story. But it's written pretty well. I didn't love the narrative style in that one, but I have the same complaint about The Seamstress of Acadie. It was very good. It also dealt with very heavy themes. The main character loses everything, literally everything. Even her citizenship, like, you know, her not her country, because I guess she didn't really have an allegiance to anyone per se. They were neutral. They're living in Acadia, kind of ruled by France, but then England kind of took over and did not treat them very well. So they were driven out of their land, and then they didn't have a home. So that's pretty core to your identity, and that's a pretty big loss. So there was a lot of working through that kind of things, that kind of thing. And it was very interesting, but I also struggled some with the narrative style in that one because of the way that Laura France kind of like would retroactively insert certain emotions or thoughts into previous scenes. That was a style choice that kind of made it more perplexing to me, more confusing to me than I didn't particularly like that. So. And Hope Between the Pages, I feel like was a very nice story. I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading it. And Pepper Basham is a good author. It lacked a little bit of the depth of the other two. I feel like the other two had a little more depth. I don't know how else to say it. Depth to them. And then I read two classics. One is kind of an interesting contrast here. One is a very old Renaissance era classic, book one of The Fairy Queen, and the other one is a modern classic written in the 40s, the late 40s, A Girl in Winter by Philip Larkin. And that is quite the contrast, let me tell you. Interestingly, in The Fairy Queen, the language was incredibly archaic, so I would not have been able to read it without like little footnotes and definitions of the words, etc. A Girl in Winter was obviously easy to understand, written in late 1940s in England, in English, and no trouble understanding the words. But understanding the actual story and what the author was doing there was something else entirely. So a little more obscure there in meaning. In The Fairy Queen, like, once you can get past the archaic language, Edmund Spenser is very straightforward in his storytelling. It's an epic poem, but he's very straightforward. You don't have to wonder, what is he trying to say with this story? What is happening here? No, it's very clear for the most part. Like, you know what's going on. That was the only other 5-star I gave, by the way, was to Fierce Wars and Faithful Loves. And I gave 3.5 stars to A Girl in Winter. And then finally, I read one nonfiction book, Fool by Ashria Chuchu, and I gave that 4 stars. Probably could bump that up to 4.5 stars, I guess. I found it very challenging and helpful, and also unique, because I don't think there's a lot of I don't think that there are many books out there dealing with the issue of food quite from the perspective that she is talking about it from, and I think it's very valuable. And anyone who struggles with any kind of food-related issue, and even if you don't, it's really a good, basically if you eat food, it's a good book to read. So, yeah, I recommend. So I haven't filled out this yet, but for my 2024 bracket, I think probably what will end up going in the line for January is The Price of Privilege trilogy, which was a reread for me, and still remains one of my big favorites, definitely, for sure. So that is my update on all of my reading. The last thing I want to do on this wrap up is show you a little bit of quotes from my quote book that I have been writing quotes down in this year. For the first, the trilogy that I read, okay, so I crammed, like, okay, there's all of these quotes, and these quotes, and these quotes. 3 spreads of quotes. So I will not bore you with all of them, but I will read the ones that I wrote big, like on the big page. Few value just how fragile a person's psyche is. All those pieces, both the good and the bad, the values, the lessons, the beliefs that construct us, they're all woven into the fabric of our being. Once you start pulling out the first thread, the entire person is in danger of unraveling. So that's that quote. Then the next one. We often fail to recognize our greatest godsend simply because it comes bundled in suffering. And then, you let God kill one life to resurrect another. And that is honestly really a key quote from that story. Oh, I have another one. Is it 4 spreads? Okay. Which one of us, given foreknowledge, would have the strength to pick up our cup and drain it to its dregs? If we knew what was coming, would we? I don't think so. Subsequent books, I did not write as many quotes, and I didn't write quotes from every book, and I won't. Just ones that really struck me, or ones that I have time to. The next was Hound of the Baskervilles, which I did find some quotable quotes there. And I'm trying to, when I'm writing in here, I'm trying to mimic the font especially, and also the coloring from like the colors that are used in the covers of the books that I'm reading. So I'm kind of trying to go with that. And the Hound of the Baskervilles, these are the quotes that I wrote down. The devil's agents may be of flesh and blood, may they not? And then, I am perfectly satisfied with your company if you will tolerate mine. I like that. I think that would make a good quote for like a t-shirt or something. And then, evil indeed is the man who has not one woman to mourn him. I mean, true. And then this one I really liked. In the context, it's in the context of the story, it doesn't stick out like as meaningful as it is. But if you take it, it's one of those quotes. If you pull it from the story, it's really quite profound. And it says, "It may be that you are not yourself luminous, but you are a conductor of light." In other words, you aren't the one with the brilliance, but you allow brilliance to shine through you. And then a couple quotes from Veiled in Smoke. Compassion, she had discovered, was not a bottomless well. And I think that's true, humanly speaking. The body repaired itself far easier than the spirit, definitely. Belonging and responsibility were two sides of the same coin. And then the one I wrote, Larch, which also would be a really good t-shirt or mug or something. She was limited, but God was not. I like that. And then finally, A Girl in Winter had some really beautiful quotes because it was very poetic kind of writing. Philip Larkin was actually a poet more than a novelist. So there was a lot of beautiful passages, but I didn't highlight them all. And also I didn't want to write all of them down because a lot of them were really like lengthy, like an entire paragraph. It was really just lovely, lovely description of various things. But as beautiful as it was, I don't know. This is kind of a small book, and I kind of want to stick to having like meaningful quotes, not necessarily just beautiful, although there is definitely a place for that. And I appreciated that about the book. There was some beautiful writing. So from A Girl in Winter, there was one quote that I thought was really profound. Now that it was too late, she felt that all the time she had been paying attention to the wrong things. And on that lovely note, that is my recap for my reading in January, my reading life. And did I succeed in reading everything from my January TBR? Yes and no. I finished everything for every challenge that I had committed myself to. Didn't actually commit to anybody else, just committing to myself that I would do these challenges. I did all of the challenges, and then a couple personal goals, namely to finish reading the book one of the Fairy Queen. But I did not get to any of my fiction and nonfiction mood reads that I had selected as options. I actually went with other mood reads when I did a mood read, so that's fine. That's kind of like the whole idea of mood reading. And except for one, I picked up the nonfiction book, And the Dead Shall Rise, but I have not finished that yet. Who knows when I will. I'm about 1/6 of the way in. So what is that? Like 15% or something like that? 18%? Anyway, so I've got a ways to go on that one. So anyway, that was my reading month in January, and it was a fantastic reading month. Went very well. Read a lot of books, read a lot of great books, and so I'm looking forward to what February will bring. Probably not as many books, but hopefully still some really good ones. So let me know, what was your favorite read of January? How many books did you get to in January? By the way, not a contest. If you only read one, good for you. And, or if you didn't read any, but that's fine. It's not a race or a contest. Anyway, let me know how many books you read, what they were, what your favorites were. Did you have any 5 stars, any DNFs? Did you finish all your goals for the month? I'm curious. And I will see you next time. Bye.